You are watching Reed's Conversations, a podcast series on writing, filmmaking, acting, and theater. In this episode, I will have a conversation with writer and marketer Brad Cook. Hey everybody, welcome to Reed's Conversations, the podcast series on writing, filmmaking, acting, and theater. It's just great to be back behind the microphone again. This is the 11th episode of my podcast, and I just had a great conversation with Brad Cook. Brad Cook is a writer. He has novels as well as screenplays that he's worked on and currently working on. Also, he has done a lot of marketing for software tech companies such as Apple. Brad has done a lot of great marketing for a independent film called Saving Lincoln, based on the life of Ward Hill Layman. And then also he recently contributed a story for an anthology book called Shakespeare Adjacent. Shakespeare Adjacent, here's the book right here. And for those who are not able to see the cover, if you're just listening to this episode, there's a pretty much the cover is Shakespeare himself, but he's holding a cell phone in his right hand. He has a laptop in front of him, like a MacBook, but it's called a pear instead of an apple. And then also in the background's a TV screen and lampshade of a modern lampshade. And it's edited by Lou Tambone and Ally McDowell. Again, just a collection of stories inspired by the works of William Shakespeare. And it's to read or not to read, that's not even a question. And it just takes 13 classic works from Shakespeare's and just gives them the nice wild twist. So some said that are science fiction and just variations of his stories, which is cool. So we definitely talked about that book a lot with that I did with Brad. But then also we talked about his work that he is still doing as an administrator and kind of a caretaker of a website that is all about Colin Cantwell. Colin Cantwell was this great genius, engineer, artist, everything you can think of, really. And he's best known for doing some of the early preliminary designs for Star Wars: A New Hope for George Lucas. Like in the earliest conceptions of basically the kind of the basic shapes of what the Imperial Star Destroyers would be, the X-Wing starfighters, as well as the TIE fighters, just the preliminary shapes, if you will, before great artists such as Ralph McQuarrie, Joe Johnston, and so many other great artists were able to basically, continue to improve each other's work till we get the designs we have now. So Colin Cantwell was involved in all that. Also, I learned that he did the movies War Games and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He was able to help out with those productions. So Brad is the current caretaker and administrator of the late Colin Cantwell's website. So we definitely talk a lot about Colin in this episode. Also people who knew him personally as well as professionally. We definitely talk about that. And then also Brad talked a little bit about the book he's also writing based on Colin Cantwell's life. And then also we talked about a movie that's early in its earliest developments, but we couldn't talk too much because, again, it's early development. So it's kind of like you don't want to count your chickens before they hatch. So very respectfully, we're able to talk about as much as we could. But it was just fantastic. And just hearing about his life, too, from when he was a kid and college years, how we both came across wordplayer.com, and just hearing, just kind of swapping stories about, our affiliation with wordplayer.com, as we like to call ourselves, word players, meaning that you're kind of like a member of Terry Rozzio's website, wordplayer.com. Again, Terry Rozzio's the writer of Disney's Aladdin. He co-wrote that film with the great Ted Elliott. Both Ted and Terry worked on Shrek, Pirates of the Caribbean, Mask of Zorro, Men in Black, creative consultants for Ants and Shrek 2, and just so many great films. So we definitely shared our connection with wordplayer.com and just really talked about Terry's columns, which is featured near the end of the episode, his top five. So just a great conversation with Brad. So anyway, I also need to want to thank people too. In my previous episode, I mentioned about my migraines. So very quickly, I don't want to take too long with his introduction. So thankfully, everything turned out okay with my MRI. Nothing too serious detected by the doctors. So whatever's causing my migraines, I'm just watching. Just any foods that might trigger migraines, or if it's just simply ear infection. So I'm just still watching myself, but thankfully there wasn't anything too serious, thankfully, when I had my MRI done. So I really appreciate those who have reached out to me to check up on me. Thank you so much, seriously. And then my own little personal plug here before I start the episode. I'm currently doing, as of this recording of March 2026, I'm part of a Wicked sing-along concert that's going to be presented by the Exclaim Inc. Performing Arts for Youth, which is a nonprofit children's theater. And we're just doing a concert version of Wicked. We're just picking the highlights of the songs. We're going to both perform them vocally, as well as there's some great dance choreography going on. And that show is going to happen in Bowling Green, Kentucky on Thursday, March 26th through Sunday, March 29th. For the weekdays, weeknights, I should say weeknights, it'll be at 7 p.m. And then on Saturday, 7 p.m., Sunday will be 3 p.m. For information about the Wicked Sing-Along concert, please go to the website exclaiminc.com, which I'll present somewhere in the description of this episode. So anyway, just wanted to do a personal plug in that. So if you like Wicked, the Broadway musical, or the movies, I'm definitely part of that. So that's what I've been doing for the last this month and last month. So I'm part of that show, and I'm very grateful to be part of it. So anyway, so let's go back to our main topic now. Without further delay, please join me in a conversation that I had with writer and marketer Brad Cook. All right, so I am with Brad Cook. So Brad, thank you so much again for coming on my podcast. This is a real honor to talk to you today.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here. I think this has to be the first interview I've ever done of this
Really?
nature. So yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, so you've never been on any other podcast before?
No. I guess you're surprised to hear that, but no, I don't know. You're the first person to say, "Hey, I'd like to interview you." So there you go.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, because I know that we have something in common where we're both followers of screenwriter producer Terry Razio's website, wordplayer.com.
Right.
And but of course, I don't live in California, sadly, so I live in Kentucky. But you currently live in Northern California, based on what you just told me recently before the interview started.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a few hours north of the Bay Area in a city called Chico. I was in the Bay Area. Well, to go back, I mean, I grew up on the East Coast in New Jersey. Graduated from college in 1992, so it tells you how old I am. I'm
No.
56 now, and moved out here. Spent about a decade in the Bay Area, and then we moved up here because we wanted to be able to buy a house, and schools are good up here and all that. So I mean, the Bay Area, as you might know, is just crazy with house prices and just gets worse and worse all the time. So
Yeah,
that's kind of where I am.
man. And so what was, I guess, just for listeners and viewers, in comparison, do you remember how the prices of houses were back in the early 90s compared how they are now in 2026?
So I can give you some sense of that. So my wife, I'm actually going to be going through a divorce soon.
Oh,
People
sorry.
know that yeah, I don't know. Big announcement right here on your podcast.
Well, that's okay. I'm divorced too, so it's
Okay,
okay. It's
yeah,
okay. Yeah.
yeah. I just felt like I should probably point that out, but not a big deal. But we're kind of roommates right now, and we're going through it, and we're just trying to navigate that. But we're doing our best. But anyway, she grew up in the Bay Area in Cupertino, and so her parents bought their house in Cupertino in the mid 70s for roughly like 200K. I believe, which at the time they were really stretching to make that purchase. Silicon Valley wasn't quite really a thing yet. I mean, companies like HP existed, but obviously Apple was not around yet and so forth. And then they cashed out in the late 90s for like 800,000 or so. And the last time we looked at the value of that house, and it's just a standard kind of California ranch house, I think three bedrooms, couple bathrooms, maybe 2,000 square feet, whatever. It's now somewhere in the ballpark of like 2.5 million.
Whoa.
Probably higher than that actually, because I think we looked at that price a couple of years ago. So yeah, it's
Wow.
it just keeps going up and up and up, and they my father-in-law was actually manager at a canning company. I mean, he wasn't a tech guy or anything like that, but he was it was a family with a single wage earner, which was him, and my mother-in-law was a stay-at-home mom, and they were able to swing it. I mean, it was a bit of a stretch for them at that time, but it was a good place to buy a house, and obviously turned out to be very lucrative for them
Yeah.
when they wanted to retire. He was able to retire early, and they could cash out. But of course, once they cashed out, there was no way for them to ever come back.
Right.
Um, that's the thing about an area like that. Like once you leave, it's almost impossible to come back because you probably can't afford to buy at those levels again.
Yeah,
So yeah.
that is wow. Well, that's good that they bought early on while the price was still like what did you said earlier, 100,000 compared to the
Two,
2 million price now?
yeah, we're talking like at least a tenfold increase since the mid 70s, so 74, 75. I think they bought it for 200K. So yeah, I mean it's north of 2.5 million. So and that's just kind of like a standard house in the Bay Area. And that's just because Cupertino is obviously very desirable. The schools are good. Obviously Apple has been there forever. And the big tech companies have really just fueled a lot of those increases. I mean, there are people making pretty crazy money. I mean, I've worked in tech for a while, so I've certainly seen that firsthand. Although I was not an engineer, so I didn't make crazy engineer money. But yeah, I mean, people, have done quite well for themselves. So um, I don't know how it's ever going to slow down, unless the big earthquake happens and there's some devastation. But obviously it'd be horrific.
Yeah.
So,
And I
but
also
yeah.
and I was also going to ask about, I know that there were some wildfires that happened in not too long ago. So when that happened, did that
Mhm.
affect any part of California where you live in the northern part of California, or has your neighborhood safely okay and not affected too badly by those wildfires we had? What was it, a year and a half ago? I think, yeah, not, I mean, still, so it's not that long ago.
Yeah, we've had a few of them. So you might remember the Fire in Paradise,
Mhm.
California, which was the basis of that movie with Matthew McConaughey. The what was it? The Lost Bus. I think it's on Apple TV.
Mhm.
I have not watched it. Paradise is actually right next door to Chico, and so we saw firsthand the aftermath of that. It was insanity.
Mm.
It was really, our house was not threatened, but I actually, I used to, I worked at the time at Facebook in the Bay Area, and I was spending, part of my week down there staying with a friend and then coming back here. And the day of that fire, I was keeping in touch with my wife, and she's like, "Yeah, I don't know, this is getting really bad." And Chico was getting threatened, but we're on the other side from where it was being threatened, so we would have had to basically burn through most of the town to get to us. But it was still just a little nerve-wracking, and thankfully my manager said, "Just go home." Just go home. So I drove back up here, and I have to go up I-5, and it was in November, so it was dark early, and I get to the part of 5 where I have to turn off onto this highway called 32 to get into town, and there's these two big orange balls just looking like they're hanging in the sky. and those were the fires in paradise, because paradise is up in the mountains, so it's elevated. It was just so creepy, and just driving in there as I was getting into Chico, there was more and more traffic passing me, going the other way. It was almost like something out of a movie, like the zombie apocalypse is happening and I'm driving into it, right? Like
Wow.
here I am, like I hope I'm not doing something stupid here, because if we have to evacuate, we got to go sit and all that.
Wow.
And I'm not, and I don't mean to laugh and make light of it. It was just so kind of surreal
Yeah.
and crazy. But it was a pretty sleepless night, and we were keeping in tabs on things, and we had a go bag and all that. And luckily, we never had to evacuate, but we knew people who lost their homes in that
Mhm.
fire. And the day after, it was just there was so much ash in the air. It was actually like it was really cold because the sun was blocked out enough that it was very cold and very gray outside, and it was very apocalyptic. So it's Paradise still hasn't recovered from that. And then we did have the fire in the park. I think that was like summer 2024. Some idiot, and that was some idiot in a car he was
Mm.
driving along, and it sparked on some rocks, and there was a fire, and luckily they were able to contain that, and there wasn't too much damage or deaths from that. But I don't think anyone died from that. The Paradise Fire, a lot of people died, and it
Oh.
was pretty crazy. Yeah. So anyway, on that note, but
Wow.
yeah. But yeah. So so far right now we've been fine. We have yet, there have been other fires here and there, but we have yet to experience any that are that have like directly threatened us where we have to pack up and go or anything. So
Well, that's good. I'm just glad that you're okay because I just based on the news coverage I saw, it's definitely horrific. So I can only imagine that scenario of you driving, seeing the two fireballs up in the mountain, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah. And it's not to, make light of it. It's just kind of like
it's
it's
just
just a surreal feeling of like, okay, this is definitely feels like I mean, it did from what I saw just from the news coverage on the other side of the country. But I'm just glad you're okay, seriously, and
right.
everyone.
Yeah.
But also my thoughts and sympathies greatly go to everybody affected by those fires in that part of California.
Yeah.
Man, gosh. Which also brings us to California itself. So you said you're originally from New Jersey, then you came to California. So just
Mhm.
growing up as a kid, uh, was did you ever do like any theater, or was it just primarily just being influenced by movies, like just like or TV shows at the time when you were growing up, especially in that part of the you know, uh, this the late 60s, early 70s, and then going from one part of the country to another. So what inspired you as a kid? What did you grow up loving and watching just as throughout the years, through your childhood?
Yeah, I mean, I was born in 1970, so I'm very much a Gen Xer, very much a Spielberg and Lucas kid, so many of those movies, in the theaters when they came out, and I include things like Back to the Future, which Spielberg produced. I mean, I remember seeing that in the theater, and yeah, those were a huge part of my life. On TV, I watched the old Star Trek reruns and Space 1999, things like that. And Star Wars, though, definitely just kind of blew me away as a 7-year-old kid, and something I still love. So those were big influences on me. And I'd say that, certainly in the world of fiction, I mean, obviously things like The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings were a pretty big deal for me. Douglas Adams, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books, Monty Python was a big part of my childhood. I don't. It's funny because they would show Python on PBS here in the U.S., and our local PBS affiliate did not censor it. So every so often you'd see a woman topless or hear some words you can like and you're like 12 years old or whatever. And you're like, oh my gosh, wow. Like this is the channel to show Sesame Street, and here's a lady's boobs or whatever. Holy cow. Yeah, oh, like wow, that's okay. So that was definitely interesting. That really, obviously informed a lot of my sense of humor and things like that. So yeah, those things were a big part of my childhood. We moved around a lot, and then like I said, I moved out to California not long. I went to Rutgers and graduated in '92, and then moved out to California.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, those are classics. You can't
Yeah.
go wrong with Mighty Python, but that's just thinking about the uncensored version on your, oh my gosh, because I'm just used to seeing things edited. I remember not Mighty Python, but Blazing Saddles, heavily
Mhm.
edited on TV. Then when you finally watch the unedited versions, like,
Yeah.
so I can only imagine like your shock watching PBS. It's like, how old were you when you saw Mighty
Oh,
Python on
yeah, I
PBS?
was probably like 11, 12 years old. It was, because that's how Python really got in America, right? It was PBS affiliates were picking it up. And I guess maybe some of them were censoring it. I don't know. But ours, which, I guess decided, hey, we're not going to be prudes. And it's not like there was anything about Monty Python that was that awful for an 11-year-old. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
a parent myself. My kids are older, and I would not have cared if they watched Python, at 11 or at that age, or even a little younger. It's not a big deal, but it was certainly, as you said. I mean, it was a big deal because everything was so heavily censored on TV, and like you said, yeah, anytime you watched movies, it was always a revelation when you got the chance to actually watch it, back then on VHS or whatever. Later, it was like something like Blazing Saddles, and realize like, oh,
Yeah, yeah, it's like
there's a whole lot here that I missed out on TV. Okay.
yeah, so it kind of makes you appreciate, like, I'm so glad I saw the uncensored version of Mighty Python on PBS. So that is
Yeah.
awesome. Wow. And then yeah, so those are good classics. And also were you just when you were younger, were you already just writing stories as a kid, or did that just happen like post like being inspired by all these great classics. Sometimes, with different writers, it's different where, sometimes people write later. So how about for your situation? What was yours like? Were you already just, writing stories or anything like that as a kid while you're watching all this uh, great movies and TV shows?
Yeah, yeah. I was definitely, writing stories a lot as a kid. I still have a story I wrote in kindergarten,
No.
that's somewhere in a box. So yeah, I was always a writer. I did try, in junior high to like try to write like a fantasy novel, and had all these ideas, and just I didn't really understand. I mean, even though I'd read plenty of books, I just didn't really fully understand like how to actually like tell a story. So some people got to figure it out, I guess, earlier than others, but I definitely wrote a lot, and that's kind of continued through my whole life, kind of off and on over the years. I mean, sometimes it's kind of lied fallow, and other times it's gotten going again.
Yeah, it's kind of like the peaks and valleys of just creativity, if you will, where it's like,
Yeah.
and especially when you're young in junior high, it's kind of like because you're just learning, because when you're that age, you're still figuring out, okay, how does this work? How do I physically construct a story and for it to make sense, not just to me, but to the reader that's going to read this. So yeah, I mean, that's understandable completely.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and I that continued in high school. We had a literary magazine that came out, at the end of each school year, and I was my senior year. I was kind of on the editorial staff of that, and was part of the process of selecting stories, and I had a couple in there. So yeah, and then college. I don't know, college. I discovered being having a social life and things like that, and that kind of stuff kind of went to the back burner a bit. But I was an English major, and so I was still immersing myself in fiction and things like that, and then I, came out here. So, yeah, and it's just kind of been up and down in the years since.
Oh, that's awesome. And I was going to say, what were the while you were being, being in having English as your major in college, what were the books that stood out to you the most? Whether it was part of your, lesson plan, was there any particular stories that stood out to you where it's like, oh, I never thought of it that way before. Anything specifically comes to mind?
Um, I don't know. I mean, I did the usual stuff, like the Shakespeare class and all that. I do remember there was a science fiction class that I took, and we got, we read War of the Worlds and 1984. And I admit I had not encountered 1984 before college. And that was a book that really, really kind of messed me up, just because of what the main character goes through. I mean, that was a book that I think really kind of shocked me. Um, but yeah, I don't know that there was anything really that stood out too much, in college. And I guess I forgot to say the high school I went to, we actually had some really cool electives. We had a film class in high school. And it was an English teacher who taught it, and he would show movies on projectors. So like he wasn't getting like VHS tapes and putting them on, watching them on TV. And so he explained aspect ratios. So like and we saw, and he showed all kinds of stuff. I mean, that's where I first saw Kurosawa movies and Bergman and, some silent films. And I mean, he showed all kinds of great stuff. And like I said, he would show them on a projector so you could, see the full aspect ratio up on the screen. And even at one point, he would usually be at the start of the semester in the class explain, like, well, this is what you see on TV.
Yeah.
Like he'd show you how it gets cut off, so that was kind of really eye-opening education for me too, when it came to movies.
Yeah, that's incredible. Gosh, and just watching on an actual projector
Yeah,
before the paint and scan and all that stuff. Wow. I mean, those are, you can't go wrong with Kurosawa or Bergman. Those are classic filmmakers. I mean, most of the work that they've done have inspired other filmmakers, like what
right.
Kurosawa's, The Hidden Fortress. That was some inspiration for George Lucas for Star Wars, and
Mhm.
even Seven Samurai is basically the original Magnificent Seven Western. So
Right.
yeah, that's
Yeah, yeah,
cool that you got to watch these classics while going to, school. And so that is awesome.
yeah. Yeah, no, it was really great. And, I don't, it cost them however much money for him to get, the films on, get reels of actual film, and have money. He'd have two projectors in the back of the class so that when one reel ran out, he could start up the other one. And of course, you couldn't watch an entire movie in one class, so you'd see it over the course of 3 or 4 days during the week, and then talk about it. Um, but it was really cool that we got to do that, and that was uncensored. We actually saw Pennies from Heaven, the Steve Martin, which
Yeah.
is a movie I feel like I should revisit at some point. But I do remember the teacher made a point of pointing out, I guess, because there's can you talk about bare-chested women? There's like a scene, there's a shot with a topless woman in that film, and I remember the teacher going, "Okay, like we're gonna see a topless woman here. I hope everyone's okay with this."
Yeah, just don't, it's like, don't go running to your parents saying, guess what the teacher showed us.
Yeah, exactly. You could tell that was the subtext of what he was saying, was basically like, "Come on, kids, don't narc on me." It's I'm not showing you porn or something stupid. I'm just showing you a movie.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, yeah, I mean, I guess it kind of helped grow, living, and that was in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and I guess just living in an area that was a little more progressive and not so kind of where people get worked up about stuff like that.
Yeah, and then once you graduated from high school, so what brought so was there anything particular about California that led you to, move out there? Was it like film specifically, or was it just wanting to pursue just a major in English or both, or anything like that?
Yeah, well, I went to Rutgers in New Jersey for college, and actually, I did not have an easy childhood. We moved around a lot. My mom was borderline paranoid schizophrenic, and so our life was there was a bit of turmoil. My parents divorced when I was 13. We lived with my mom for 2 years. My dad got custody of us, which, 1985 for a single guy to get custody of his kids was a pretty big deal. I mean, not as common as it is now. So there was a lot of turmoil there. So a lot of that was what led me to want to put 3,000 miles between myself and a lot of those issues, especially with my mother. So that was a big part of it. And then I had a friend who I'd met in junior high, and his parents were divorced, and his mom was living out in California in the Bay Area. And so his parents had an agreement that he'd go out there and live there for high school. So he and I kept in touch, and then he went to Cal, University of California at Berkeley. And we were both the same age. We both graduated from college at the same time. And at some point during college, I just said, you know what? Heck with it. I'm just going to move to California. And I already know someone. I can like at least sleep on his sofa or something or do what I have to do. So I just kind of threw caution to the wind. I didn't own much. I had a comic book collection and some clothes and stuff. And actually didn't even own a car, and drove cross country with a guy who was a year younger than me in college, and he was coming out to Northern California for an internship for the summer. So I was able to hitch a ride with him, and we broke down in Chicago.
Oh.
We went so we went and saw a Cubs game, which was fun, at Wrigley Field, and then we were leaving. His car broke down, but then it turned out his older brother was the Consumer Electronics Show,
Yeah.
that big trade show. Yeah, they used to do one in Chicago as well as the one in Vegas, and his brother happened to be in Chicago that week for CES. So his brother like put us up in a motel room for a few days while his father prepared to drive out from New Jersey with another car so we could switch cars. It was, it
Wow.
actually worked out really well. And so I got to, I was 22 years old, and I got to run around the Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago for a couple days, just checking out Nintendo games and all that stuff. So that
Wow.
actually worked out pretty well, pretty
Yeah.
pretty well for us. And then we got the switched cars and continued on our way and drove out here. And I will say, wow, the Utah salt flats are really boring.
Oh.
Just you fall asleep and you wake up and it's just the same view.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, because I can only imagine if you're just driving and there's okay, anything changed? Nope.
No, no,
Hour late.
nothing. No, nothing changed.
Yeah. So
But
I
it
can,
was a fun way to see the country.
yeah, and I can imagine that once you're past the salt flats and you actually see little formations popping up, it's like, all
Yeah,
right, we're almost
yeah,
there.
yeah. We're almost out of here. Yeah,
Man, oh my gosh. So that's a story in itself, on the way to California breakdown,
yeah.
especially in the what is this? You said 1985 or so is when
This
you
was 92.
oh,
So I
92.
graduated from college in 92. So yeah, so it was 92. So yeah, I mean, and it's funny, like we didn't have cell phones, and my friend, his brother had like a table at CES, but he couldn't afford to have like a phone line installed because he had like a little software company. I think he was making games or something. And so my friend had to call the Nintendo booth that was nearby and convince someone there to go over to his brother's booth and get his brother and bring him back to get on the phone, right? Because companies like Nintendo, I mean, they would put up these lavish booths, but like I said, most people didn't have cell phones, so they would have like phone lines wired in to the booth so that employees could use them and so forth during the show. So
Yeah.
so Matt convinced someone that in the Nintendo booth, they go get my brother and get him on the phone.
Oh, that's awesome. And especially during that period where, late 80s, early 90s, Nintendo was really becoming
Oh
popular.
yeah.
People remember Duck Hunt, Donkey Kong, Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was cool that just it's just kind of like uh one of those interesting scenarios. So like, okay, you just happen to break your car right there, and it happens to be at like, okay, great, Nintendo booth. Can we get a call or something? Though that's wow. That
Yeah.
that is cool. I mean, I'm glad you got to where you were going, but that is cool that that little midpoint, if you will.
Yeah, it was a fun little, kind of side quest for a few days. Just kind of hanging out, it didn't really impact us too much. Yeah, I mean, if we had gotten out of Chicago and we're somewhere in Illinois, yeah, that would have been a lot different, but
Yeah.
it worked out pretty well.
Oh, that's awesome. Seriously, that is really cool. And now so once you're in California, so now we're coming up to the late 90s. Which so after you fully graduated, did you immediately go into writing, wanting to do movies or novels? So what was kind of the main motivation once you graduated from college, from at least or at least completing courses at California, that wanted you to pursue just within just telling stories? So what was the main motivator for that?
Well, in college, I rediscovered comic books. I was, into music and I was subscribed to Rolling Stone magazine and they had an article about Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns, which if you know those books were kind of a big deal in the late 80s. And I was like, wow, these sound really cool. And so I found the local comic book shop and bought the trade paperbacks that collected those
Ooh.
and read them, and I was like, oh wow, okay, these are really cool. So I really got back into comic books again, and mostly read like a lot of the X-Men titles and Batman and stuff like that. But so yeah, I mean, my creative writing was, like I said, was kind of going up and down. I just had, I mean, I didn't have a job doing that. I actually, at one point in the mid to late 90s, I was an administrative assistant at an educational software company in Sunnyvale. And then I was trying to write on the side, and like I said, I was trying to get into writing comic books actually. And I was at one point, I was part of this startup called Retrospect Comics, which was this very ambitious thing that this guy started, and it crashed and burned spectacularly.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It was, it was, it's one of those things you look back on and you go, yeah, because he had all these titles and he had all these people writing them and he had artists and all this. And he rented office space by the San Jose airport and we'd have monthly meetings there. And he'd tell everyone, make sure, submit your invoices when your stuff's been approved and everything. And like, it was one of those things like when you hear about the scam, people who kind of pull kind of scams. And I mean, I never, like, he never asked us for money. I mean, I never gave him any money or anything, but he just had this big elaborate operation and we were doing all these, it was something like a dozen different comic book titles or something that were in the works, and this whole elaborate kind of, universe and all this stuff. And then it just all like fell apart. I mean, no one ever got paid. They put out like one issue of one comic, and that was it.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
that kind of crashed and burned. And luckily, I was not counting on getting paid for my invoices or anything like that. Uh, but it
Wow.
was, yeah, and I got involved in a couple other comic book projects. Those kinds of things where you talk to people. I met a guy who, I guess this was online. This was so long ago. He said he was friends with James O'Barr, who created The Crow,
Hmm.
and he wanted to do a Crow story set in the Old West, which I thought was a pretty cool idea.
Yeah.
And I worked with him on that, but that never really went anywhere. So I kind of did that stuff, and then, honestly, like, I don't know how I did, but I stumbled on wordplay,
Hmm.
as we were, talking about. At some point in the late 90s, because the web was a new thing then, and I'm here, I am at work every day at the software company, and we everyone had, Netscape Navigator on all our computers. And I did not have a very intensive job as an administrative assistant, so I goofed around on the web a lot, and I was looking at like the early Star Wars fan sites and things like that. And somewhere along the way, I discovered wordplay, and so kind of started taking interest in screenwriting because I kind of thought, oh yeah, like people write movies. Yeah. So what's that all about? So I did take an interest in that. And I was, spent a lot of time on the wordplay forums, back in the day, and read Terry's columns and so forth. So I was, I don't know. Do you want me to keep? I can kind of bring you up to the
Yeah.
present day if you want. I can
Oh yeah, please. Yeah, this is great. Honestly, yeah.
run through the whole spiel.
Sure, yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
So I was doing that. I was kicking around ideas for a screenplay that I ended up writing several years later, but I never did anything with it. It just kind of sat around. But I ended up in summer of 2000, I went to go work for Apple as a contractor doing marketing writing for them. And they used to have this game site. And so I kind of ended up being the only writer on that game site. And I was writing about games like The Sims and other things for them. And then I kind of came up with this idea that I was a reporter who was traveling into the worlds of these games because I would do interviews with developers of these games, usually by email. And so then I would turn them into like these articles because basically Steve Jobs wanted Apple.com to kind of be like an online magazine.
Yeah.
When he came back to Apple, I mean, that was kind of the paradigm, kind of like how early movies were like basically film stage plays. I
Hmm.
mean, now, of course, Apple.com is nothing like this, but at that time there was like editorial, like, heft to Apple. I mean, they had a hot news page, where they put, the latest interesting news and things like that. And they had a lot of people writing all kinds of interesting articles, articles about people like Walter Murch, who's obviously, I assume he's still a Mac user, things
Hmm.
like that. And so I decided I was a reporter going into the world of these games. So I'd write the articles as if I was inside the world of the game, doing the interview with the person, and we were talking about the game, and then things are going on around us that are happening, that are, happen in the game. That was kind of my creative outlet. And I remember asking someone there, like, is it okay if I write my articles like that? And they're like, well, I don't care. Just like whatever. Yeah. Because the funny thing about because Steve Jobs is always very like hot and cold on games on the Mac. Um, so that site was kind of like the redheaded stepchild of Apple.com. So it was mostly just kind of left alone, and I just kind of did whatever I wanted. And I got paid pretty well to do it, and I did other writing as well. And then they shut that down, at the end of 2010, unfortunately. But it was a fun ride. And I've done a lot of work in tech over the years since then. And I think I told you in my little creative outline, I had the chance in, I guess it was 2011, 2012, to do some fun creative marketing for a movie called Saving Lincoln.
Yeah.
Came out, I think, in 2013. A guy named Sal Lidvack wrote and directed that, and it was like someone I knew connected me with the producer of that film, and I got pulled in, and so I wrote stories on Twitter in the voice of Ward Hill Lamon, who's kind of the main focus of that movie. Um, and for people who don't know, he was also a lawyer in Illinois with Lincoln, and then accompanied him when he became president. And he was known for, because they wanted to assassinate Lincoln when he first was coming in as president. When he was coming through Maryland,
Hmm.
there was a plot. And if people know Pinkerton, the Pinkerton detective agent, the
Yes.
original Alan Pinkerton, the guy who started that, he was part of, he and Lamin, worked together to try to, slip Lincoln through Baltimore to get him to DC. Um, so Lamon was kind of Lincoln's buddy, and he was known for telling tall tales, and he loved singing, playing songs and things like that. He liked to wrestle. There was a story about him outside a courthouse in Illinois wrestling somebody and then going in and arguing a case. Um, he was that kind of guy, and he actually put together the Union Army when the Civil War broke out. He actually traveled around, and he was called colonel. He was just made a colonel. He was never really like a member of the military. But back then, like there was no standing army, so they just had there were militias everywhere. So he would travel around and bring all these militias together and turn them into regiments and units and whatever else, and turn it into an army. So he was a really interesting guy. I did a lot of research, and I wrote these stories, on Twitter, in the form of tweets. And basically the way I structured it, I kind of took comic strips, daily newspaper comic strips, as kind of my paradigm. So every day was like another beat in the story, and I had 5 or 6 tweets that would kind of tell sort of this moment. And then starting Monday and then to Friday, I might conclude the story, or maybe I'd have a cliffhanger on Friday, and then we'd pick up again on Monday. And, the idea was that he was just resurrected and put in front of a computer and told to to tell his tales. And so I kind of wrote in that, late 19th century kind of looping kind of, style of speaking and so forth. It was a lot of fun, and it was interesting to try to fit that into the character limit, obviously, on Twitter.
Yeah, it's not easy. Or it's like, oh,
No,
yeah, that's incredible though. That is so cool,
that
man.
was that
And
yeah. Oh, yeah, that was fun. And I got to go to the premiere of that movie at the Alex Theater in LA, and I took my family, and I had my daughter interview a few of the folks who were involved, including the actress who played Mary Todd Lincoln. Oh my gosh, whose name I'm blanking at the moment, and she's a pretty well-known actress.
oh, is she
Um,
on like IMDb or anything like that?
oh
Or
yeah, 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 yeah. She
yeah. Well, actually, let's see. I got my phone right here. I can try to let's do a good old Google search. Where would we be without it?
here,
So,
let me I and then you're gonna think of Penelope Ann Miller.
okay, yeah, I
You're
know.
gonna think I'm an
Oh,
idiot. How could I
yes.
not remember Penelope Ann Miller's name? Yeah, she played
Oh,
Mary Todd Lincoln, and my daughter got to talk to her briefly and ask her a question. There's actually, it's up on YouTube, actually, the video I made of from that. And Tom Amandes, who's done a lot of TV and film work, was Lincoln. And Creed Bratton, who was on the show The Office, was Sumner,
oh,
Charles
really?
Sumner. Yeah,
Oh,
he was not there at the premiere. It was a movie that it was okay. It was a very low budget movie. It came out the same year, of course, as Spielberg's Lincoln movie,
oh,
so it was obviously completely overshadowed by that. And the way they shot it, they actually did this kind of cool technique where they basically shot mostly in front of green screens,
mhm.
and then they might have some like tables, some physical tables and things, but they have green screens, and then they would use period photographs and then kind of build the background out of that. So if they're in a certain room in the White House, they'd use period photographs to build that background, and then they shot the actors, like, let's say, at a table, in front of the green screen, which was pretty, pretty well done. But yeah, I mean, it was a low budget, kind of indie movie, and it's got its moments. But it was a lot of fun to work on, and get a chance to just kind of do that. And it was not something that paid super well, but that was okay because I just had a lot of fun just telling stories.
Yeah, especially when you're typing in that and that as that character of like, can you give us a flavor of what you wrote at Twitter, even if you just got to paraphrase from memory, what you wrote just in the style of that character on. How he would post on Twitter?
Yeah, I mean, he would say things like, I shall endeavor to tell you the stories of Abraham Lincoln, the whatever number president of the United States, and the kind of things like that. Just that very kind of overly verbose way of talking, which, like, the character limit was what, 160. So you start typing like, I'm not,
Yeah, to be continued.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it was always fun. Like I said, though, because I would write the stories out and then I would schedule them. I forget which program I was using at the time, but I would schedule the tweets to go out, you know. And then I actually responded to people as Lamon through that Twitter account for the movie, which was kind of fun.
Wow. And also, was there any like approval too? Like, did you have to, what, like, if you type something out, did you have to send it to a person that's like, yeah, do that, or was it just like your free reign, just do whatever you want as long as it's within the voice of the character for for saving Lincoln, basically?
Yeah, yeah, Ward Hill Lamon. Yeah, I mean, uh, from what I recall, I mean, it's been a while, but from what I recall, I think Sal Litvak, who wrote and directed the movie, kind of wanted to see the first couple stories I did, but he was really happy with how I kind of captured that voice. And he was like, I don't care, just keep telling those stories. And I got access. I got a copy of like Lamon's memoirs that are in like some archive in Illinois or something, and they were able to. They paid $100 or whatever it was to have them photocopy it all and send it to me because it's not something you can go out and buy. So that was really helpful. Lamon was very much kind of de-emphasized by a lot of historians because he claimed to have foiled all kinds of assassination plots and things like that, and a lot of his claims really couldn't be substantiated, which is how he kind of ended up being more of a footnote in history. But he was actually, a good friend of Lincoln, and did play a certain role in Lincoln's presidency.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting story, and it was a lot of fun to do the research and kind of come up with stories to write about, because I would tell stories about his time in Illinois, and then also, his times in DC with Lincoln, and dealing with the Civil War. And he was in the South when the first shots were fired for the Civil War, and kind of there's a story where he talks about like being in the saloon, and so the mood is changing, and people are, they know he's from the North, and he's suddenly, under threat, that kind of stuff. So it was fun to do.
That's so cool. And then was there ever a time when you had people, replying to your post, or was there like was it a question where it required you to do a little bit of research just to reply back to whatever person replied to that post, where it's like, oh, I need to do quick research before I reply to this person.
Yeah, yeah, because I mean, I was checking that account. I had access to that account, of course, and I was checking it, a few times a day. Yeah, there was probably some of that. I remember there was one. I mean, most of the people were just like, "Wow, Lincoln was cool. Looking forward to the movie, whatever." I mean, there was one guy who thought Lincoln was an awful president and all that, and he
Oh my
wanted to like
gosh.
argue and wanted to argue, and I stayed in character as Lamon, just arguing back with him, and just kind of sparring with him on Twitter, which was very funny. Because, like, okay, dude, you didn't like Lincoln, and now
Yeah.
you're arguing with basically an imaginary. I mean, not an imaginary character. It's based on a real person, but I mean, it's like, okay, you
Yeah.
do you, I guess.
Right. And then also it'd be funny where it'd be like, if we were in person, we'll go outside and have a good old fashioned fisticuffs or something, or something like that.
Well, I'm almost certain I'm almost certain Lemon said that to him, because Lemon was that kind of guy. So I'm almost certain I probably said something about, like, yeah, it's like we shall engage in fisticuffs, if you keep uh, this up, or whatever. Yeah, I'm sure he did, and I'm sure it annoyed the guy. And it's like, dude, I don't.
Yeah, it's like, come on, dude. It's like, come on. And but that is cool. But that's cool. You got part of that marketing, just because I know some people do that. Where I think when the first Jurassic World movie came out, they set up like its own website, like as if it was
Mhm.
real. So that's cool. That in a similar way, how you were in charge for the marketing of like first person, just talking about stories just to help get the word out for the movie. So that is really cool. Really, really cool. And I
Yeah,
and I was going to say, I love Creed Bratton from The Office and
yeah.
Penelope Ann Miller. I mean, oh wow, so that's
Uh-huh.
so cool. Your daughter got to interview her. That is really cool. I gotta look for that video now on YouTube.
Yeah, yeah, I'll send you the link to it. It was fun. She was how old was she then? She was I should know. She was like 11. Yeah, born in 2002. She was 11 years old. So, yeah, I just got in touch with like the publicist ahead of time because they had a little red carpet premiere. I mean, it was nothing like a big movie premiere because it was a little indie film, but I just was like, hey, it's okay if my daughter comes and like just asks each person like one question of each person. And so I kind of coached her in that, and then I filmed her asking questions. So she talked to Tom and Penelope and Miller, Sal, and then the guy who played Ward Hill Lamon, who I don't know if he had much of a career after that. He was a pretty new actor at the time. But it was fun, yeah. And my name's in the credits as a Twitter storyteller because because it was not subject to the guilds because it was an indie film, so it was a kind of outside guild purview. And they told me like, yeah, you can put we can put your name in the credits, so that my name's in there.
Oh, that's so cool. I'm gonna try to look for the movie. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
so cool. Thank you for sharing more about that. That is awesome. Man, so Saving Lincoln, and hopefully it's on a streaming service, or hopefully it's on YouTube if you can like rent it or buy it or something like that. So I'm gonna definitely look for it. And then
yeah. I've got a DVD, but I assume it's you can probably stream it somewhere these days. Yeah,
yeah, and then also let's go back to wordplayer.com a little bit too. And I
sure.
always tell for the and any new listeners or people who watch my podcast on my YouTube channel. For those who don't know what wordplayer.com is, it is the home website for screenwriter producer Terry Rossio. And, he's made films like Disney's Aladdin from 1992, the animated version. I mean, he did Shrek, the first Shrek movie, and with him and Ted Elliott, they both
Yeah.
co-wrote those movies. And of course, Pirates of the Caribbean and Mask of Zorro. They did uncredited work for Men in Black. So when you found wordplayer.com and when you kind of saw the credentials of both Ted and Terry, were you kind of like, oh wow? And this is also just the late 90s because because I think it's 97 when Word Player officially came on. So when you were just looking through the filmography, or it's like, okay, these guys know exactly what they're talking about then. It's not just some scam of like, give me your, it's like this is
Yeah.
actual like great information. So was that your impression too when you first came across the site as I did?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, definitely, and that's when they were, as you probably remember. I mean, they were very much like kind of in the zone back then. I mean, they because there was that Godzilla movie
Hmm.
that was not very good, but they had worked on the first script of that, and they had the story by credit in there and all that. So yeah, it was really cool to be able to just go on there and just talk to them. I mean, it's kind of like if you're an aspiring actor, it'd be like being able to talk to De Niro or someone, right? I mean, in terms of if you're an aspiring screenwriter, especially at that time, you can just chat with Terry Rossi or Ted Elliott,
Yeah, which is
Um,
a privilege, I must add, because this is what's what for those who don't realize this is way before Facebook and even
right.
before MySpace. If those out there remember MySpace, may it rest in peace. That was the original Facebook. But yeah, because there's no other real social media platform. So thankfully there was the forums board, the
Mhm.
message board where people can you know, talk about scripts and movies. So it was just cool. So I think, just it's rare because now, people can kind of contact whoever now today, but back in that late 90s, early 2000s. So I have a lot of respect and gratitude for both of them, for both Ted Elliott and
Mhm.
Terry Rossio, especially if it's like, I guess I can only imagine like if there's someone that asks us, a stupid question and it's like, okay, so I'm sure I said a few questions where it's like, oh, so
I,
so
I
yes,
I I probably did too. I remember someone, and apologies if this was you, I don't know who it was, but I remember someone arguing endlessly with Ted and Terry about this idea that there should be some sort of like an associate membership into the Writers Guild. Like this person wanted like a junior level membership or something, and Ted and Terry were like, "Well, what good does that really do you? Like if you're aspiring, like it doesn't really make it much of a difference." And it just went around and around. And around.
thankfully that was not me. That was not
That
me.
was not you. Okay,
No.
good. Okay, good. I don't know who that. I mean, I don't remember anymore who that was. But yeah, I mean, like you said, like props to them for just kind of like sticking with it and responding to the person and all that because it was kind of a bit of a silly idea. But but they were pretty nice about it all. So
Yeah.
appreciated that.
While meanwhile working on these big projects. And
Yeah, yeah,
And also it was cool too because sometimes like I remember when Pirates was getting ready to be, when it's being made and Terry would give us a little snippet. Like I remember in one of the columns, the storyteller cut, where he was able to talk about the entrance of Jack Sparrow way before the movie was ever released.
right,
Just to, yeah, because if you go back and there's a column called the Storyteller Cut, which is great for those who are interested in screenwriting or just storytelling. Definitely go out and check all the columns out, which we'll go talk about columns specifically later on of this conversation. But yeah, it's just cool. So and also, if wordplay didn't exist, we would have never been talking right now. Honestly, just we wouldn't be talking about
yeah,
right now.
yeah.
So that was kind of a cool time just to kind of, and it's still a fantastic website, and there's still a lot of great columns that Terry, posts still. There's some great ones. So if you haven't looked at it recently, Brad, you got to definitely check them out. It's awesome.
I yeah, I will do so. Like I think I told you I just kind of fell off. I mean like so many people did. My understanding is the forums have really decreased in activity because well, it's unfortunately because of social media.
Hmm.
But it was such a great place and there were so many gosh, there was that person who went by, was it Kit Sargent, who was a working screenwriter. It was a pseudonym they were using, and they would talk about stuff. And there was a guy who was one of the producers on Xena, Warrior Princess, who I don't remember if he used a pseudonym or not, but I mean, you had all these, people, and of course, Charles Pogue and
Hmm.
all these people kind of just hanging around there too, who had all kinds of interesting, useful things to say. And the way the forum was set up was admittedly a little janky, right? You had to click on each thing to like read. It wasn't like you could just like most forums where you just see like a thread of posts. But that also made it like a fun little treasure hunt too, because it's just like, oh, click, oh, what am I going to find here? What am I going to find there? And there's a lot of like really good stuff. I mean, if that was your jam, it was a great place to be for a long time. And probably, like I said, probably like you said, it probably still is. But it was definitely wonderful for that, for just interacting with people and talking about stuff. So it was a lot of fun.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And now there's other websites too that have flourished, like John August, the screenwriter, who did,
Mhm.
I mean, he's best known for Big Fish and Frankenweenie with Tim Burton, and movies like that. And also, just there's just so much out there now. But Terry and Ted both were kind of at the forefront of
Yeah.
just making it available, and you didn't have to pay a dime, which is
Hmm.
amazing. So yeah, so again, a lot of respect for both Tedeli and Terry Razio. But also that brings me to asking about the so-called film group, the Southern California film group, which I know you're not so you never actually got to participate in any of their
No.
productions. But have you had a chance to meet fellow word players like Mariama Myers, Steve Barr, Jalen Bailey? Have you had a chance to either meet any of them since you're both within the California state area?
No, there's actually one word player, a guy named Shannon McNamara, who was kind of on the forums off and on. He's in the Bay Area as well, and so he and I kind of connected in person. He's worked in tech for a while too. Um, I think he's kind of gotten away from screenwriting, but yeah, he's the only person connected to wordplay that I've talked to in person, aside from you, if we can call this in person. And
Yeah.
actually, I've traded many emails with Steve Barr and other folks, Ronson Page, I'm very friendly with, and some other people, but I've never met them live in person or even talked to them on video, like on a Zoom or something. So yeah, I'd love to, someday, and well, hopefully I'll get a chance to at some point.
Yeah, because I've been toying with the idea of doing like a word player podcast where I have like various word players in one podcast just talking
Okay.
about which would be interesting because we have Steve Barr who's now in New Zealand.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like coordinating everyone's schedules. And it's like, yeah, but hopefully we'll make that happen. That's the dream goal is to have you and Steve Barr back again, Mariama Myers, Ronson Page, who definitely want him on my podcast too. Uh,
Yeah.
but that's cool that you still had this, you still virtual contact, even though not Zoom like we're doing now. But so that's cool that you're still kind of in contact in certain degrees. So it's still
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I actually talked to Steve by email not too long ago about something I'm working on right now, for actually a film that I'm involved with. So yeah, it's always nice to kind of have those connections in your back pocket,
Yeah.
just to see what can come of them.
Yeah, and this film that you mentioned, so we can't really talk too much about that. So do we have to still keep that kind of under wraps just because it's still in the
Yeah,
early phase?
it's so yeah, so it's in the early stages. So it's about a guy named Colin Cantwell.
Hmm.
And so in the summer, so I guess I'll go back a little bit. So, I had worked at Facebook in Menlo Park in the Bay Area, and I hosted Colin and his partner Sierra for an event there because Colin was going around to comic book shops and Comic Cons and all that back then, and selling signed prints of his work. And so I had them there. It was an employee event, but tons of people showed up and bought prints and everything, and it went really well. And I stayed in touch with Sierra, and then Colin died in 2022, and then in 2024 she was looking for someone to kind of take over his website. So that coincided with a layoff that had happened to me, so I had the time to spend, and so I redesigned and relaunched his site, which is at colincantwell.com. And for anyone who goes and looks at it, just know that my forte is mostly in writing and not so much in web development and design. So, so don't hold that against me. I know it's not the greatest site in the world, but it was literally on a shoestring. I mean, I had no budget to speak of to really do it. It was just me. And Sierra actually shipped me the prints of Colin's work, and I sell them through this online store there, and I'm doing that on consignment basis. Um, and then basically, so what's come out of that since then is I'm doing research for a book about Colin's life,
Hmm.
which I'll be writing, and that's been a lot of fun. I've interviewed all kinds of people. I had the chance to spend about 30 minutes with Ben Burt
Oh my
a
gosh.
few months ago, which was a lot of fun. Yeah, so because I Sierra put me in contact with a PR guy at ILM, and so he helped me. Like I have a couple like copyright Lucasfilm disclaimers on the site that they've allowed me to use, like some clips from Andor, because the first season of Andor's got the Cantwell class arrestor cruiser that shows up.
Ooh, I
That's
did not know that.
Yeah, so episode 11. of the first season of Andor. There's a ship that shows up, and it's identified as a Cantwell class arrestor cruiser. That ship is
Oh.
Collins, one of Collins' original Star Destroyer designs. They pulled it out of the archives. They actually had it's in Solo very briefly,
Mhm.
and it was going to actually feature more prominently in a scene in Solo that they cut, and then it got pulled back again for Andor. So that was created in homage to Colin, because so many of those ILM people, obviously know who he was. Um, and and Sierra and Colin, like, I mean, they got to visit Lucasfilm during their travels and things like that. So and for folks who don't know, so Colin worked at a company called Graphic Films in the 60s and 70s. And this is something I want to talk about in the book, because Graphic Films was a breeding ground for all kinds of people. Hal Barwood was there, Douglas Trumbull was there, Con Pedersen, uh, Robert Swarth, Colin, John Dykstra,
Man.
uh, Ben Burt was there briefly, which is why I ended up talking to Ben because he was there after Colin left. But Colin had worked on a movie called Voyage to the Outer Planets, and he had built these models of the outer planets and Starship and all that. And he'd worked on that actually with John Dykstra. I've traded emails with John Dykstra, and he's like, I don't really have much to say about Colin. We didn't
Oh.
really work together directly together too much. I'm like, okay, oh well. But and I trade emails with Dennis Murin, who doesn't really
Mm.
know much, didn't really have anything to really offer, which was fine. But I spent about 30 minutes of the PR guy at ILM put me in touch with Ben Burt, and I got to spend 30 minutes talking to him just about his time at Graphic Films because it was very much it was this like um, it was based in LA, of course, and it was just like so many of those people went on to do all kinds of work on all kinds of movies, and Graphic Films was supposed to be the special effects company for 2001: A Space Odyssey. And then Kubrick canceled that contract because he was like, I don't want to try to work with them in LA while I'm in England.
Mm.
So and then he poached all those people. Trumbull and Con Pedersen and Colin went over there and worked on all these people got poached away. And of course, Les Novros, who owned Graphic Films, was not too happy about that, unfortunately. But that's kind of an interesting little story. But so I've been doing a lot of research there, and then we are in early days of a biopic about Colin. It's not a documentary. It'll be dramatization. We are working with someone. I mean, I don't know that he'd care if I use his name. We have raised a little bit of money for the film so far, but I'll just keep it a little bit on the down low
Yeah,
right
of
now.
course. Yeah, of course.
But
Yeah.
he's got a track record in Hollywood. He's made movies. He's raised money. He knows people. So I feel good that if the movie can happen, like if we can, we're in the early days of the script. I'm actually working on the script with him because we didn't raise enough money to pay him Writers Guild minimum for him to write the script. And so he amazingly said, hey, why don't you write it with me? Which was
No.
kind of wild. Like, okay. I feel like the guy who just got called up from the minor leagues or something, right? Like, oh my gosh, like
Oh, that's incredible.
yeah, yeah. So, and I've received a little bit of money from what we've raised so far. Again, it's nothing life changing, and it's not a big deal. But we've created an LLC for the movie. I own 15% of that, and so we'll see. And it's not gonna be a big budget film. He's only looking to make this film for about 5 million.
Yeah.
So we'll see. And I've seen documentaries like Lost in La Mancha. Have you seen that one
I,
about
I have not, but I've heard of it. Have heard of it.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I actually had not seen it either, and then I watched it recently, and that's a great example in how a great example of how a movie can totally go off the rails. Terry Gilliam raised 32 million, you
Oh,
know,
yes, yes, that
yeah,
yes.
for his
Oh,
Don
yes.
Quixote movie. They started
Yes.
shooting in
Oh, that was a
Spain. and everything went that could go wrong went wrong, and it all fell apart. And yeah, he finally made the movie he wanted to make, but that was like 15 years later, so and the point being, like, that's why, when I talk to friends or family about it, I'm like, this is a cool thing that's happening, but I also know, and I have complete faith in the guy we're working with. It's not that. It's just the shit can happen, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you look at his donkey. I mean, he raised $32 million. He started filming. You'd think that, like, hey, you're going to make a movie, right? Why would you not make a movie? And Johnny Depp was starring in it, and then it all just fell apart. And yeah, he made it 15 years later with Adam Driver, but
Mhm.
still, it was it just shows you how these things, how fragile really movies can be.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's what, the general film audience don't really understand
Yeah.
because, and I think it's good not to count your chickens before they hatch. I think it's kind of like if you're cooking something and it's like, oh, is it ready? Oh, when are we going to eat it? It's like, well, it's not ready, and you just don't need interruptions that's going to make it a total disaster or have it burnt to a crisp. Or it's like, oh, well, we almost had something here, but we can't feed everybody. But yeah, so I understand, honestly, because it's kind of like, okay, we're not at that point where we can really yeah, and also kind of shows you just how like good movies are like miracles, because it's like, and unfortunately there are bad movies out there too, but it kind of just shows where if something gets thrown off, it's like a deck of cards, take one card out and the whole thing can, you know, implode or explode or what, however. And also we know that Terry talks a lot about that on his wordplay website as well, especially building the bomb, where I talked about his experience with Robert Heinlein's The Puppet Masters, where the movie got
Mhm.
made, but not in the manner how he and Ted Elliott set out to do. But so yeah, so it's understandable. Just make it's like, okay, let's not screw the pooch, let's not jinx ourselves. So I totally get that. But also, I want to go back to what the names you mentioned too for our listeners and those watching this podcast. For those who don't know who Ben Burtt is, all those Star Wars sound effects that you hear, from the lightsabers to
Mhm.
blasters to Chewie to R2D2, Ben Burtt is the guy behind all of that. So the fact that you talked to the legendary Ben Burtt for 30 minutes, but then also, I mean,
And
also,
oh, I was going to say real quick, and I had the chance to tell him that I taught my kids to recognize the Wilhelm scream, which
yes.
he appreciated. He laughed. He thought that was pretty good. So,
Yeah, and for
oh,
those who don't know what that is, it's
yeah,
a classic Western fall. Like if you watch Star
yeah,
Wars: A New Hope, when it's in the near the middle of the film, when Princess Leia and Luke Skywalker are kind of at a dead end where there's no bridge, and of course
right,
stormtroopers are above and they're firing, and you hear that, oh, ah, that's
yeah,
the Willem scream. That's the, and this has been used in so much stuff. There's
right,
even one in Aladdin
right.
when yeah, so it's so, oh my gosh. And then but then, wow, and then Douglas Trumbull, because he also, trying to remember, did he also go on to do Close Encounters of the Third Kind? Because I
He
know, or something.
Yeah, he did. So he led the special effects. So Colin worked on that movie as well.
Hmm.
Colin actually has a credit in there for technical dialogue, and I've been trying to find out which dialogue that actually is. And actually, his partner Sierra, he still gets residuals from that film that then passed to her when he died.
Wow.
Um, and he did what I believe is the first ever test of its kind, where Spielberg wanted to try to use computers to create the special effects of the flying saucers.
Hmm.
And so there's this really great story about Colin. They worked with this company that had like a defense contract, and they have these. You have to remember, this is like 75, 76, so massive computers, and computers were massive, and it was this whole thing, and they were trying to sort of do a test, and it took hours and hours and hours, and it was able to output one frame of film.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so Spielberg said, never mind. we're just going to do it the old-fashioned way, and they did, and then Trumbull actually led the effects. What was his company called? Something General. Anyway, they were doing motion control. And from what I understand, the version of motion control they were using was a little bit more sophisticated than what John Dykstra had developed at ILM for Star Wars,
Yeah.
which is kind of an edge. And what's really interesting too, and something else I want to get into in the book about Colin is like they were not the forefront. Like motion control was happening before that too. Like I think a lot of people maybe think that like John Dykstra invented it for Star Wars, but actually like people were doing it before then. And I actually talked to a few people who were in the part of the UCLA animation program, which Colin was part of, and he was actually the first animation major at UCLA because he told he wanted them to create the major for him, and he was an engineer, so that shows you what kind of person he was. But I talked to a few people who were part of that program, and they said that they remembered Colin doing these mathematical equations for like some form of like motion control for animation. And they just, even the professor just had no idea what he was doing because he was figuring this stuff out. So, it's all these things obviously you like don't exist in vacuums, right? I mean, they sort of evolve out of something, and so that's something else I want to kind of get into in the book is how motion control and even computer generated effects, right? Like everyone thinks of Jurassic Park or whatever, but Colin in the mid 70s was like, this was a guy born in 1932, so he was very much at the forefront of a lot of that kind of stuff in the set, especially in the 70s and 80s. And then he worked on war games, and then he left Hollywood and moved to Colorado, and he was an engineer at HP for a long time. But really, really fascinating guy, and I think this biopic is going to be a lot of fun because he was a very quirky, interesting character.
Oh, that is amazing. Wow. I can't wait for the book whenever it's ready to be published. I'm going to definitely get a copy for sure.
Well,
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah, yeah. Well, it's I'm still doing the research. I'm still interviewing people and still following threads and so forth. There's a lot. Like I said, he did so much. He was a musician, an artist, an engineer, a designer, and he came from a whole family of all these people. His parents, his dad was an industrial designer. His uncle Robert Cantwell was actually a pretty well-known author who was friends with Hemingway and other people, and so it just even the extended family is just full of all these really smart, interesting people. His brother Gil was an engineer as well. Um, so it's just really, really interesting.
Wow. That's incredible. I mean, just the whole family tree of like,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah, yeah, because sometimes like you got these brilliant people, and then it's like, oh, like their parents were quote unquote ordinary, right? Like, and
Yeah.
you got this really brilliant person, and sometimes you can kind of see the seeds of where that came from in their parents. Like maybe one of their parents kind of had some artistic skill or something. But with Colin, it's like that whole family just, and they all seem to gravitate toward other people who were like them too. So they would just, of course, produce children who were very much like that, and just generations and generations of kids, who are just like just smart and creative and talented and just doing all these interesting things.
That is awesome. I wish more people were like that. So yeah, no, that sense of creativity, exploring, invention, innovation.
Yeah. He just, I mean, he grew up immersed in that stuff. I mean, his parents, he was not someone whose parents were like, oh, quit
Yeah,
around or whatever. I mean, it was encouraged, and he loved all that stuff.
which is amazing because we really have to, really thank him for his work on Star Wars because even though, like he came up with the basic shapes of the X-Wing and TIE fighters and of course the Star Destroyer, even though other brilliant conceptual artists like Ralph McQuarrie and even Joe Johnston, who's gone on to have such great career as a director with
Right.
Honey, I Shrunk the Kid, Jumanji, Rocketeer, and then he did the first Captain America film. But with Colin, I definitely have a lot of respect for him. just because just even they're just the basic shapes, the iconic shapes of those TIE
Mhm.
fighters, X-Wings. And thankfully he is mentioned in the documentary series on Disney Plus about Industrial Light and Magic. So thankfully there is a segment that he has mentioned in that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, which is so that's so cool, Brad. That is really cool. As you can see, I'm a Star Wars geek.
yeah.
And so, and also I have, oh my gosh, so that is incredible. That is so incredible that you get to be part of that. And even though John Dykstra and Dennis Muren, even though they didn't really talk much about Colin, it's like, hey, I messaged Dennis Muren who's worked on The Abyss, so Terminator 2, Jurassic
Yeah.
Park, and all these. So that's cool though. That's really cool that you're trying to shepherd Colin's legacy. And also I love his website, so it's a great
Okay.
website.
Thank you.
So for those who are watching this podcast and listening, definitely check it out because it's a great, great, great website. So it's really cool. And also speaking of books, we also have to talk about another book that's been recently published. It's called Shakespeare Adjacent, and I actually have a copy for those who are able to watch, who are watching the podcast. But if you are unable to watch, the best way to describe it is you have a picture on the front cover of the book of William Shakespeare. There's like a Apple computer, but it's called pay, but there's like a pair in front. He's holding a cell phone, and in the background's a TV with a lamp, but he's still dressed in his formal you know, era garb from, his time. And the book is edited by Lou Tambone and Ali McDowell. Because you contributed a short story in that. So how did that come about to be involved with this book? Because the story that you contributed for the book is a prequel to a novel that you're also working on called The Veiled Universe. Is that accurate?
Yes, yeah. So it's kind of funny. There's actually a Star Wars connection there too. So, Lou Tambone is the guy again, like someone I've never met in person, never even talked to on Zoom or anything, or on the phone or anything, but I've known him online for 20 plus years. He was one of the people back in the late 90s who had one of the early Star Wars sites. And so he's always been associated with that, and he's a writer. He's written he did a book about Blade Runner and some other books and so forth. And I'm friends with him on Facebook, and so just again, someone else I've always just kind of kept in loose contact with here and there. And then so the Shakespeare thing, obviously they're all stories that are inspired by different plays of Shakespeare. Um, and so he put out, I think he was talking about it on Facebook or something. And so I just like messaged him and was like, hey, I'm interested. And actually, I've been in a writers group, and someone else and another person in my writers group, she did a story too for that anthology. And it's called Shakespeare Adjacent because the stories are not just like retellings of the plays. And so my story is called Wilt and Amanda, which is based on uh, I'm forgetting. How terrible.
It's
Was it? It's the Shakespeare play. Was it Tristan?
Yes. Let me actually, I got the book, so I should be able to look it up here in the
Oh
oh,
my gosh.
yeah, it's
I,
definitely Tristan and
I'm
because it also does show like let's see here. Yeah, I think it is a play on the Tristan and what's the other last name? Is they made a movie, I believe, with James Franco in it or something, I think. Um but yeah, so definitely yeah, for those who definitely know, it's definitely here it is. Troilus and Cressida.
oh yes, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Cressida. Yeah, that was it. Not Tristan, not Tristan.
Troilus, yeah, my bad. Troilus and Cressida.
Cressida,
Yeah.
that's it. Cressida.
So I should have done my homework before I talked to you, but
No, it's
and
okay.
it's kind of funny too because I wanted to go for a play that was not well known. Like I'm not going to choose Hamlet or whatever, I'm going to go with something that is a little less well known. And I wanted to do something set in Silicon Valley. And so Troilus and Cressida, of course, is set during the Trojan War. So I thought, oh, like, I can turn it into like corporate warfare, right? Corporations, quote unquote, warring with each other, right? So that's kind of what the basis was. But for folks who don't know, Troilus and Cressida is actually like one of what they call Shakespeare's problem plays because it's kind of a weird play. The way it ends is kind of like,
Hmm.
and the Trojan War is still going on and things, and it's kind of one of those plays that's just it's well written. Of course, it's Shakespeare, beautiful language and everything, but it's just one of those plays just kind of funky. So trying to turn it into a story was definitely a challenge. And I definitely went astray of the play in a lot of ways. But I did. I have to pat myself on the back. So, one of the things about Helen of Troy, of course, is mentioned in the play, and that's a
Hmm.
big deal that she's been kidnapped. So I turned Helen into an acronym for a software program that's been appropriated by another company. Um, and so yeah, so that it's set in Silicon Valley in 2008. Um, it's a prequel to the novel I'm working on, and it's got very much in the novel is a science fiction novel. As you can imagine, the Veiled Universe is a science fiction, sounding title. Um, and basically kind of sets up Wilt is shows up is pretty prominent in the novel.
Hmm.
And so the novel is actually about this guy who's not in the story. It's a guy named Evan who finds himself sort of caught in this kind of cloak and dagger kind of situation between two warring alien races. And essentially, instead of it being like a big blown like war, they've both infiltrated Earth, but they've infiltrated Earth using kind of subterfuge and so people don't know that there's actually aliens walking around them, right? Because they're using disguises and so forth.
Yeah.
But there's this whole conflict going on between them, and this guy Evan gets kind of pulled into the middle of that and ends up, on an interstellar adventure. So I wrote like 50,000 words and chucked them out because I
Oh
wasn't
gosh.
happy with it and started over. And now I'm up to about 70 or 75,000 words. And I admit, I know where the story's going and all that, but I've kind of put it on the back burner a bit while I work on the Colin Cantwell thing and
Yeah.
other stuff that's going on in my life. And I had a lengthy, job search, which, dragged on forever and so forth. But my hope, my plan is, the book about Colin will happen, no matter what. Hopefully the movie will happen too. And then hopefully I can use those, hopefully I have my novel ready and I can, pitch that to publishers or I guess to agents so I can get in front of publishers, using the movie and the Colin book as sort of my credentials for
Yeah.
that. So that's kind of my hope. And then um, go from there. I got ideas for a sequel to the book, and so hopefully I can maybe make it a little bit of a series or something. And I don't know, see what happens, right? I'm 56 years old, and I got to think about my retirement and
Yeah.
maybe set myself up for that. So.
Oh, absolutely. But that's amazing, though. Seriously, I definitely hope everything goes well for all your projects with the Colin Cantwell project for both the book and the movie, and also the Veiled Universe. And also, I was curious when you're working out stories, do you outline beforehand, or I know there's some that definitely like to outline. I do, but I wasn't sure if it's like you just do like you already have in your head and you just try to. I know some writers are different. Some prefer outlines and some don't. So, how's your process when you're trying to not just break down story, but I also like to call it you're organizing the story, which is a better. So, what's your method for that?
Yeah, my method's very janky. Which is why what happened with my novel, so like why I got 50,000 words in, and I kind of had a good idea, sort of an idea of where I wanted to go with the story, but not really. and it just kind of petered out. And so when I sat down to rework it, I added a couple characters and sort of figured some things out. But I'm good at like figuring out the beginning of it and kind of where I want to go with the story. And like with this novel, like I kind of know the kind of the main points I want to hit and then like the ending.
Hmm.
But it's very hard for me, and I don't know what this is, to just really get too deep into an outline and really like get into those details of like what's going to happen. And I find that I just need to just write it,
Yeah.
just write the story and just see where it goes from there and see what happens. And like with my novel, I mean, I've had some kind of serendipitous moments where inspiration is struck and when this happens or that happens or whatever, and I come up with these ideas, and I feel like I can't come up with that unless I'm just writing the story,
Yeah, it's kind of like,
actually living it in my head, and the outline is so abstract, it's just hard for me to do.
right, yeah, but at least you have your target though. You know, like, okay, this is what I'm aiming for. So as long as I try to get as close to that as possible, yeah, so that makes sense. Yeah, I can see that for sure.
Yeah. And I think too you can get away with that more obviously with a novel, right? Because you can engage in world building and all that, and your plot does not have to be as tight as it needs to be for a movie, right? I mean, with you know,
Yeah. And that's the difference between, books and movies. Like, it's interesting because David Coeb, the screenwriter, who's best known for writing the screenplay adaptation of Jurassic Park,
right.
Mission Impossible, Spider-Man, and things like that, he was able to write two novels, or I guess one is called Cold Storage, which a movie came out just a few months ago, but it was his first novel, Cold Storage, and he said that it took him a while to kind of, because he's so used to writing screenplays. So when you're in the different format, it's like, oh, I can then just go to the perspective of this cockroach that's crawling up a tunnel. So it's kind of like you can say, Mary, like you can do like Mary, all of her life, Mary wanted to go to the moon. She dreamed about it when she was a kid. Then you can kind of go down, and then you go back to your main point of like going on this the rocket ship, and or
Mhm.
that's just just a far-fetched example. So have you found that to be true in comparison to writing novels and screenwriting? Because they're different formats, and sometimes people think, "Oh, why didn't you just take the book as is and present it on screen?" But it's like, well, if you do, that's going to be a 5 hour movie or longer, and unless you want it as a mini series or limited series. So do you agree with that notion of they're different, they're both different animals that with different approaches of how you not just write it, but even if you're adapting it, do you find that to be true?
Yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, even if you look at something like Lord of the Rings, right? Even if you watch the extended editions, you're still not getting the full story from the book. Tom Bombadil's not in there, for example. But if you read the book, like there's a long passage of time that happens early on in the book, right? Where like Frodo leaves Bag End and he goes to live elsewhere for a while, and Gandalf's off doing his thing, and like, do you really want to see that on screen? 'Cause
Yeah.
it's not really that interesting on, I don't think it would be very interesting on screen, right? In a book, it's okay because it's the story and it's world building and you're getting a sense of the characters and it's kind of fun, but it's not very, and that's why, obviously Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens, when they wrote it, I mean, they knew like, okay, we gotta like, have the party, Bilbo disappears, boom, Gandalf like knows like, oh, this is you've got the ring, this is the one ring, we've got to get out of here, we gotta, escape.
Yeah.
Here come the black riders. Like you gotta get the story in gear. So yeah, I think that yeah, they're two very different beasts, and I kind of really hadn't touched the screenplay format for a long time until recently when I've been kind of working on the Colin Cantwell thing, and so that's kind of put me back into that mindset. And yeah, with a movie, you definitely, you really need to really think about the plot, right? And really think about the story, and and be very lean in that regard, and
Yeah.
get to the next point and not kind of drag it on. And even something like, I mean, I remember reading the original, reading Jurassic Park, and then comparing to the movie. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that was lost. And I don't know that Jurassic Park, you mentioned a miniseries. I don't know that like, does that need to be a miniseries? I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
at the time, the only option was really a movie, right? Because then now we've got, now we got the ability with streaming to, turn a book into a 4 or 5 episode, streaming show or something. But I don't know that Jurassic Park necessarily would need that. I think it works fine as a film adaptation.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I've actually read all the drafts of Jurassic Park because there's other writers involved, like, Michael Crichton. He had the first take of, he actually wrote the screenplay first. And it was interesting reading the first draft of a script because it did follow a little bit more closely to the book. Like they had the T-Rex on the river sequence with Alan Grant and Lex and Tim, which they had a version of that now in Jurassic World Rebirth, which I honestly loved because it's like, great, we've been waiting for that sequence for years from the original book. But at the time they couldn't do that. So it was like, okay, we can't afford to have this massive T-Rex in the year, while filming in 1992. So we just have to eliminate that sequence, even though that's great in the book. At the time, the technology just wasn't quite there yet.
Right.
And then when I read the second draft of Michael Crichton's adaptation, that sequence was not in there at all. So it's like, okay, we can't do this or that. So it's kind of like pairing. And then it gets transferred to another writer. Yeah, so I think people, and when I say people, I just think those who aren't film savvy or understand everything. It's like, well, you have to kind of condense it, but then you can leave things off screen. And I think with Philippa Boyens, she jokingly said, or half seriously said, "Well, who knows that Frodo and Sam didn't see Tom Bombadil in the movie? That probably happened off screen somewhere. We just never got this
Right.
in between the, so things like that." Now that brings us to the other part of this segment. So I like to do this with fellow word players who have been part of the Terry's website, wordplayer.com. So we're going to talk about your top five word player columns, and then we're going to
Okay.
go one at a time, and we're just going to discuss it. And so, what would be, and it doesn't have to be order from greatest to least. So, what would be number one column that you like from Terry Razio's website, wordplayer.com?
I mean, the first one, I believe, is the one that I told you that I was sort of the first one on my list. I don't know if it's necessarily the best one, but
It's Foot in the Door.
it's
That was the one.
foot in the door. Yeah, yeah. And I was kind of revisiting that one. Um, and that's just a good kind of introductory one, and it's got some really good advice like that Warner Brothers hallway test and
Hmm.
things like that. But and I do kind of wonder though how relevant that is anymore. Given how people are kind of more spread out everywhere and not as much productions happening in LA and all that.
Well, I think it's still important because in the column, the Warner Brothers hallway test, the basic idea is like, imagine you're like a script reader at a production company, executives leading a new hot director for his second or whatever feature. Then you have to talk about the movie, and it's simply like, hey, what's the movie about? And if you and then we're not talking like, it's kind of like, oh,
Mhm.
it's cool, it's about these professors who were recently, fired off of college. They're going to be paranormal exterminators. They're going to basically be exterminators that catch ghosts. They're called Ghostbusters. And just kind of like getting a flavor of like, and also it's similar if you're talking to like like say anybody, like, hey, what movie are you going to go see? It's Hoppers. It's like a funny take on Avatar, or instead of aliens, it's a girl is somehow able to have her mind inside a beaver and she gets to experience of wildlife. Oh, okay. So, but then it's like, oh, well, nothing's really happening. So, yeah, so I think it's, even though the setting is kind of different, I think it just kind of shows like what really is your story about. Can you talk, and I like it like Colin because, and I think you'll probably agree with me on this, where it's kind of like, can you are able to talk about the story just as if you just saw it or you're going to see it, basically, I would say.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I would agree. I mean that's a good point because even if you're not talking about literal, hallway conversations now, it's still, you still need to, Zoom call with someone or an email or whatever, kind of encapsulate what that movie is and ex explain it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think it's still so yeah, so it's a great column, and that was the first introductory column. And then that leads us to your second top two or one of the or in the top five category. And I believe that one is the strange attractor.
Yeah.
Now for those who don't know that column, talk us about the strange attractor column and why it's also important for projects that you're working on, whether it's books, movies, or anything. What's the importance of the strange attractor?
Yeah, the strange attractor is where you kind of take your concept and you kind of apply something unique to it, right? Something interesting, something that's going to really grab people's attention. And it was Terry's second column. And so I just thought it's really useful because it's just a good way of helping, aspiring screenwriters kind of understand like how they should think about their concept, right? What they want their story to be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because sometimes for me, I read, as many scripts as I can read, both professional. So has there been a case where someone gave you a script to read and it's like, yeah, I'll take a look, and then you're kind of reading it and it's like, I'm not too sure about it's kind of like it's because strange in the case is unique, attractor meaning, oh, it's going to attract. Like if you think of Wizard of Oz, the strange attractor for that, even the L. Frank Baum book is a little girl. Okay, we know who that is. A tornado suddenly comes and whisker to this far off land where she encounters a tin man, a scarecrow, cowardly lion, and she has to get back home. The only person can do that's the wizard. So we kind of so even though and thankfully the success of the book has made it seem, we accept it as audiences member as and readers. So has there been a case though, if you've read someone else like someone's work and it's like I don't fully, it's kind of like you can't, it's not tugging you in. Has that ever happened to you before? Like just reading someone else's work and it's like I don't know, I'm not. Has that ever happened to you before?
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. I don't, I haven't read much in the way of screenplays, I admit, in recent years, but certainly when I was spending more time on wordplay and I was kind of reading, amateur scripts online and so forth, because there were a lot of people just posting their scripts online, and yeah, I definitely there were definitely plenty of times where I read scripts that, and I can't think of a really good specific example, but scripts are just like, oh, well, yeah, yeah. It's okay, I guess.
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't know. Just there's just really nothing too exciting here.
Right. Now, if we were to use the same strange attractor level at Back to the Future, so if you can imagine bringing yourself to that little kid who sees the poster of Back to the Future, just describe that experience and what attracted you as a kid to finally watch Back to the Future. Can you use that as an example just from your moving going experience and why, kind of like if you can see those same elements basically?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you're talking about like the classic Drew Struzan poster for Back to the
Yeah.
Future. Yeah, I mean, yeah, and the thing too is like it probably seems quaint now, but DeLoreans were kind of cool, interesting cars at the time. So yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think the circumstances under which I saw that. I mean, but yeah, I think that the poster really grabbed me. I think the DeLorean was, I mean, it was like a quote unquote cool car at the time. I
Mhm.
was 15 years old when it came out, so I mean, it definitely spoke to me. I remember seeing it with my dad, and my dad was born in 41, so he was a teenager in the 50s, so that like really that part of the film really hit him. Um, and something though, the like when you bring it Back to the Future, something that I've really come to appreciate in the years since is, and you probably know this story too, about how Bob Gale like found his father's high school yearbook,
Hmm.
and was kind of like, would I have been friends with my dad in high school? Like what would, what would happen? And that was, and that, I guess, I mean, I guess you can say that's kind of an example of a strange attractor where it's like, they didn't start out by saying we want to make a time travel movie. It was Zemeckis and Gale started out by saying, well, like, what if you could like hang out with your parents and if when you were a teenager, if you could be with them when they were teenagers, would you even liked each other? Would you, like, what would that have been like? And then of course from there, well, how do you achieve that? Well, even time travel makes that happen. But that's where they started, right? And so that's how they were able to create a story that resonated so much with people because that's just a common thing that, that a lot of people, I think, think about, right? As you get, especially as you get older and you think about your parents and so forth.
Right. So I think the key for also Strange Attractor is that universal, it's something based on some universal aspect that we all can relate to. It's not like, oh, I want to go, oh, I lost my favorite napkin, so I'm going to go to the land of Maypole on a backwards bicycle. I mean, that's what Terry describes in the column. And because he came up, he described that as a want, and he was like, when do kids, unless it like when do kids start liking their favorite napkins, or so, it's kind unless it was from like your a person, like it's unless it's a treasured memento, then you can. But yeah, but going back to what you mentioned about, gee, what would be like if you saw your parents as kids? I mean, that's kind of like that. You can instantly within that question, like, okay, that just gives you so many possibilities too, like from story wise, where it's like, yeah, like, because we know when in the film Back to the Future, Lorraine says, "Oh, I never," she would basically say like, "Oh, the idea of chasing boys," and we see her trying to chase down her own son, unbeknownst that's her son. So she
Right,
like,
right.
and then of course, yeah. So it's kind of like it's interesting where it's like you get that. It's like so there's a lot of that possibilities, and you can relate to it. Or if it's not relatable, it's compelling, I think. So even if we never time travel before, you can say that's a very compelling idea. So I think strange
Mm.
attractor, but also compelling. Do you think that's true in that regard?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think so. And I think, there have been tons of time travel stories and I think there's a reason why that one has resonated so much. And I guess people will argue about, H.G. Wells' The Time Machine or other stories and, which one is the best. But I just, that's always been my favorite time travel movie simply because it's just so relatable. I mean, it's just, it's not just, oh, Marty McFly goes back to the Revolutionary War or he goes to kill baby Hitler or
Yeah.
something, where it's like, oh, okay, that could be kind of a fun movie, but it's great because he just, and it's purely accidental, right? He ends up back in 1955 and encounters his parents. So,
Yeah. And then he
um,
messes up with his own existence by, saving his dad by pushing him out of the way of the car that was meant for him to be
right.
hit, and then finding the young Doc Brown. So as you can see, it's kind of like the task, which is another great column. But yeah, I agree fully because it's kind of like, it's kind of like, and it's you can definitely see the interplay between character dilemma and like, okay, this is what has to be done for sure.
Mhm.
And also that brings us to another column called Crap Plus One, which was
Yep.
co-written with Ted Elliott. So let's talk about that column, number three on your list of Crap Plus One. Let's talk about that column.
Yeah, that's a column, that sort of focuses on something I think a lot of people can fall into, a trap you can fall into, especially when you're younger, I think, and you're kind of like, think you're like know it all about screenwriting, for example, and you go see a movie and you're like, oh man, that movie sucked. I could write a better movie than that. And, of course, the whole idea of that column is like, well, don't aspire to like just be marginally better than that movie because that movie got made for a whole bunch of reasons. And the fact that it sucked may not even have anything to do with the screenwriters, right? The director may have made changes or
Hmm.
even in the editing room, things happen, whatever, right? So there's a lot of things, as we know, that can be totally outside of screenwriters' control in terms of what the final product is. So yeah, and that should not be what you aspire toward. You should just want to write great stories and not so much, focus on, well, that sucked. I'll just write something that's better than that.
Right, yeah, because it's good to be inspired by great material. I mean, and there's a reason why we're inspired by movies like Star Wars, the original one by George Lucas from 1977, Back to the Future. I'm pretty sure, like, if you have Lucas and Spielberg, who, they're always aiming for what's the bet, they're always aiming for something better. It's not just, oh, well, that because you never see them doing that. So yeah, I think that's really important for any kind of storyteller to always shoot for the stars or shoot for the moon, even if you land beyond the stars. So at least you're there, not just, oh, I'm gonna go down or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. And like, if you look at someone like Spielberg, like, do you aspire to write a script that's marginally better than, let's say, 1941?
Mhm.
Or do you want to write a script that's better than like Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Like if you're gonna do a plus one, I'm not saying, I mean, 1941 has its redeeming
Yeah.
qualities, and Raiders is amazing, of course. But the point is, like, if you're shooting for marginally better, shouldn't you be shooting for like the gold standard, and try to exceed that, not trying to exceed something that didn't work for various reasons.
Right, exactly. It's not just settling for mediocre. It's like, and there's no way we can achieve perfection, but you can aim it and hope to, you can aim for it, and it motivates you to a higher level. It's not just settling for second best, even though it's not perfect.
Right.
Yeah, and yeah, in 1941, yeah, it's a pretty wild comedy. But then of course, then thankfully, not thankfully, but then Spielberg was able to do Raiders of the Lost Ark with George Lucas, and now we got Indiana Jones, and
Right.
yeah, so and I'm sure, they all, even George Lucas himself would watch the Kurosawa film. So it was always like they were inspired by other great pieces of art too. Now, and I guess it's not to say that we can't enjoy mac and cheese every once in a while. So it's sometimes it's good, but it's always good to aspire, even if we don't completely hit the mark, but we have our target at least. So I totally get what you're saying for sure. Totally get
Yeah.
it for sure. Now let's also look at number 4 on your list, and that's going to be It's Been Done. Now let's talk about that column, and let's see. And so, what was the reason that's in your top 4?
Yeah, It's Been Done is a good column because it just kind of talks about, the basics of storytelling paradigms that exist, right? And just sort of the different kinds of stories are and how they're really, at the end of the day, only so many kinds of stories that that you're going to tell. And so I think it's useful because I know like when they talked about that Sandman movie that
Mm-hmm.
they worked on, and that they used what was it, the king loses his kingdom,
Yeah.
story, as sort of like the way they framed, their Sandman adaptation. And so I think that's a great thing that I think you can use to just sort of, if you're having trouble with your story, if you know what the world is and the characters, you can draw from that to figure out, well, what should my story be? Like I've got these people in these situations, but what actually is going to happen? And so that's it's very useful from that perspective. And yeah, I mean, and like Shakespeare said, there's nothing new under the sun. And
Hmm.
and that said, I mean, not too long ago, I revisited Adaptation,
Oh
which I
yeah.
just love. I love it's such a great movie. I have not read The Orchid Thief, but I know that was considered an unadaptable book. And for him to just decide, well, I'm going to basically write a movie about how hard it is to adapt that book.
Yeah.
And then, but it's such a great movie because, and I don't even know which of the story paradigms it would fit under, right? But it's such a just such a brilliant kind of look at, sort of creativity and um, and the Hollywood process and all that stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And of course, Nicolas Cage plays both brothers, the twin brothers, Charlie Kaufman, of course, and then what's his twin brother's
I think Donald, right?
Donald. That's it,
Donald,
Donald.
yeah.
Yeah, another brilliant movie, man. Yeah, that is really cool. Yeah, so, and it's cool though with because also it's kind of nice guideline too, where because mostly plot speaking, like we can even use that in reference to Pirates of the Caribbean, where it's like the person is because in Pirates, Elizabeth Swann is kidnapped, and of course, one of the plots or the task is to go rescue her, even though it's a kind of damsel in distress type of story. But we know that the character of Elizabeth Swann, she has more of that tough. She's not just like, oh, woe is me. She's doing her best to try to get out of that situation too. So yeah,
Hmm.
that's another great column. And now we come to the fifth one, that is throw in the towel. And let's see, why is that in the top five category? Let's talk about that column because I know Steve Barr and I we talked about that already, but I want to hear your perspective on how that how what with you reading that column by Terry.
Yeah, I mean, my kind of takeaway from that is the fact that kind of everyone, I think, suffers from imposter syndrome. Everyone wonders, am I good enough? There's that whole idea of like, oh, you need to know this and you need to know that and you need to be this, brilliant person. And so you might as well throw in the towel because you're not. You don't know all those things.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think it's a good column to read. I think anytime you're kind of feeling like, oh, can I really do this? Because it's a column that kind of beats you up in the beginning, obviously, with these ideas, but then it's like, well, just keep trying. That we all suffer from imposter syndrome. No one's going to be perfect. You know, I mean, I've got this amazing opportunity working on this, story for this Colin Cantwell movie with someone who's pretty well known, and it's easy for me to think like, oh, have I seen all the classic movies I should have watched? Do I know all the books? Do I know everything I should know? I no, I mean, I don't, but I try not to, wallow in that and just believe that, hey, like I've got this great opportunity, I'm going to follow it.
Yeah, and also just trusting your taste too, where I think that's
Mhm.
important. Because I think it's like Rob Marshall, film director and also a brilliant choreographer who did Chicago, the musical film adaptation, and of course he directed the fourth Pirates of the Caribbean film on Stranger Tides. I watched an interview that he had done. And I think he said that the only thing a director can offer is his taste, really, where, at the end of the day, your taste kind of also it kind of like your taste on something affects every other department, which is true because sometimes if and sometimes it can be in good taste or bad taste depending on that barometer, if you will, of like it's kind of like if but also by the end of the day, if that's all you can really go on is like trusting yourself, knowing and it's kind of like it is the tale, not he who tells it, in a way, kind of things. Is that so? That kind of that same feeling is what you're trying to communicate to?
Hmm. Yeah, 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 I would say so.
Yeah, and then it's like, well, I'll probably do a better job than somebody else will, who will just. So yeah, so I think it's good to know where it's like, hey, just do your best. That's all we can do is just our best forward, not crap plus one. Just be like, hey, I'm doing it. I'm giving it my all. I'm not. But yeah,
Yeah.
but I guess I can't wait for these projects. Seriously, Brad. Gosh. And is there any other information we should know aside from the Cantwell website, the book, and the movies in development and Veiled Universe? And for Shakespeare Adjacent, where can people go get the book if they want to check out Shakespeare Adjacent?
Yeah, you can find that on Amazon,
Mhm.
where you can find 80 gazillion other books. So yeah, Yeah, just search Shakespeare adjacent and it'll pop up and yeah. Um, and I don't know that there's anything else. I mean, I think that was a pretty good overview of my life and how I've kind of gotten to the point I'm at now and where I'm hoping to go from here.
Oh, that's amazing. Seriously. And I can't wait for all of your future projects and definitely keep me updated.
I
And
will.
if there's anything you're able to show me without breaching like a contract or anything like that, I love to read stuff like that, obviously. And man, but just the again, I still can't stop thinking about how you talked with Ben Bird for 30 minutes with the legend himself and of course
Yeah,
and then and hearing so that's incredible. So definitely continue to keep carrying the torch. You're doing an
yeah.
amazing job. So if someone hasn't told you recently, you're doing an amazing job with the website and carry on that.
Thank
We-
you.
yeah, just to let people know, like, yeah, there's this other, guy, Colin Cantwell, who did all this great stuff. And I had no idea he worked on War Games, which is another fantastic movie with Matthew Broderick and Ali, is it Ali
Ali
Sheedy?
Sheedy. Ali
Yeah,
Sheedy.
yeah,
Yeah,
Ali
yeah.
Sheedy, yeah. So yeah, so that's amazing. So definitely keep me updated. Seriously, definitely keep me updated on everything. And I can't wait to read your both books whenever they come out too. So yeah,
Yeah,
definitely keep me in a loop for sure.
I will. I will. Thank you so much, Reed.
Thank you for watching and listening to my conversation with writer and marketer Brad Cook. If you have enjoyed this episode of Reed's Conversations, be sure to click the like button and subscribe button on my YouTube channel. That way you will be notified for future upcoming episodes.